Welcome to the NBA Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyden, taking a look at tonight's 8 games on FanDuel and DraftKings. You and I discussed the slate a little bit before we started recording live. Decent amount of games. I mean, the slate looks okay at first glance, and then you kind of dig in and you're a little bit overwhelmed, I felt.
Yeah, it just I don't know. It doesn't seem that great of a slate. I don't know. Maybe I'm still dragging. My motivation is still down because I'm just burned out from stuff like the Memphis Grizzlies injury situation that happened yesterday. And it's always really, really tough to refocus after stuff like that happens. And hopefully we don't get anything like that tonight and the slate ends up being better than it actually looks.
Yeah, I mean, we got a couple blowout concerns. We'll get to a couple here in a minute. But start with this Miami-Washington game, 204 total, by far the lowest on the night. Miami on the second night of a back-to-back. I will say that their prices are cheap, which makes Miami, I think, a little bit more interesting, as far as like some of their bigger guys. But I don't have a ton of interest really in this game in general.
Yeah, it's not a game that I'm too high on. I mean, obviously from the Washington side, which we'll get to in just a second, there's a couple of interesting options to consider. Miami, I mean, like Whiteside went off last night, but we're still talking about a guy that's playing limited minutes. Like he only played 25 minutes last night, 25 minutes the game before that. If you want to roll him out in GPPs because he's still really, really cheap, go for it. The matchup isn't great. It's also not like really terrible. But again, you're playing with fire with a guy that is really struggling to stay on the court for extended minutes. Outside of him, like the rest of these guys are still really cheap. Olenek is really cheap. He's producing really well in limited minutes. Again, you're taking a risk because he's a guy playing limited minutes. Justice Winslow went off yesterday. He's really cheap, and it's a great matchup for him. I think he's an interesting option, but I don't know. It's really tough to trust Justice Winslow in any matchup.
Yeah, like I'm not playing these guys for a matchup. Like it really is, like you said, it's just kind of a price point play for some of these guys. Like you said, Olnick's cheap, Winslow is cheap. Dwayne Wade, I don't mind, but not really thrilled on this size of a slate with other options at guard. Like last night, I didn't mind him just because, shooting guard wasn't as strong. I feel like tonight's a little bit different, but I think Whiteside's probably the only guy I'd take a shot on just because of that price. And like you said, like the matchups not great, but it's also a matchup that he's has thrived in before.
Yeah, I don't know if I mean, if you're wanting to target Wade just because he's, gets it, has just a ton of usage, go for it. But like targeting old people on the second night of a back to back is probably not a profitable strategy.
That's very true. To just play 21 minutes, but then again, I guess it is Dwayne Wade.
Yeah,
So,
it's an old guy on a back to back.
yeah. Dragic, do you have any interest here?
Maybe a little bit in tournaments. I mean, he was fine yesterday. He performed really well. He just didn't play very many minutes. I mean, 26 fantasy points in 23 minutes, 7 to 10 from the field. So if you want to go back there, you can. I do think this game probably stays a little bit closer because obviously Washington a much better team than the Phoenix Suns. So he's still cheap. I mean, he's 7,100. That price really plummeted compared to what it was yesterday. Over on FanDuel, he is 6,900. I do have a decent amount of interest there, just because, like I said, the matchup not great, but it's also really not terrible if like compared to some of the other matchups on the slate.
Yeah. Washington side of things, I think a majority of my interest has been with really Otto Porter, through the recent stretch for Wizards games. I'm not thrilled with this side again. Like, once again, it's a matchup I'm not great with, but I don't mind Porter here. I think he's my preferred option on this Washington side. I also don't mind Satoransky as well.
Yeah, Satoransky's interesting. He's really cheap, and like I know he's been really really bad recently, but we've seen plenty of upside out of him over the last 10 games. He's posted some pretty big outings, and Miami not bad or not that great over the last 10 games against point guards. This is pulled before the Suns game, but 22nd defensive efficiency over the last 10 games. So if you're looking for a cheaper guy, especially on DraftKings, I think Satoransky's in play. I would not be afraid of using Bradley Beal here. He hasn't been shooting the ball very well recently. Like, let's see, over his last 6 games, he's 42% from the floor, but like he has a couple 20% games in there. That being said, like this dude's outside of the Gold State game is still pretty much a lock for like 40 plus fantasy points. And so in cash games where you're paying 8,700 over on DraftKings and 8,500 on FanDuel, I think is a solid option. Like he's playing a bunch of minutes and you know the usage is going to be there. So it's really hard to get away from him in cash. And you mentioned Porter. I think I would have a little bit of interest in tournaments, but that would be about it for Porter for me.
Yeah, I mean, and as far as other Washington guys, Markieff Morris has been decent. He's averaging 27 fantasy points over his last five. Oubre probable for tonight's game. I don't have a lot of interest in the front court here, like either with the centers who are just basically splitting time too.
Morris is a guy that you can feel pretty comfortable in using in cash games just because like he's still really cheap. He doesn't have a ton of upside recently, but like if you're getting 25, 28 fantasy points at 52, 5,500, you're okay with that. And then the rest of the guys like Marcin Gortat's down to like 4,100 on FanDuel, so I could see some people possibly going there just because he doesn't need to do much to pay off that salary. Cheap center on FanDuel is really, really, really bad, so it may be a viable option in tournaments.
Yeah, I don't hate it. I mean, it's Gortat. I mean, it's a matchup that he put up about 28 fantasy points last time in, but 13 the game before. That's your range of outcomes with Gortat there.
Yeah, it's not pretty if you're considering Marcin Gortat, but like I said, he's down to 4,100, and punt center on FanDuel is pretty gross.
Yeah. Anyone else on Washington?
No.
Atlanta and Toronto next year. Toronto favored by 12. This Atlanta team has just been a kind of a team that's been dragging as far as minutes go. Like no one's playing outstanding minutes of late. Probably a team that's going to get blown out tonight. Like I don't like predicting blowouts, but Toronto's been a pretty easy team to predict this year.
Yeah, Toronto's just basically blowing everyone out. I think their average margin of victory against the Hawks in 3 games this season has been 20.7 points. And I actually went and dug in because like one of those games was like 34 points, one was 15, and one was 13. But at like the start of the fourth quarter and the last 2 games, they were up by like 20 points. I just like I don't like predicting blowouts either, and it's because it's a really volatile thing, but I feel pretty comfortable in saying that they're going to probably blow the Hawks out here. If you're wanting to get exposure to anyone from Atlanta, it would probably be John Collins, and that would probably be it for me.
Yeah, I don't mind him. I wish he was a little bit cheaper, but I mean, he has been playing decent. The minutes have been up for him. He's averaging 27 over his last 5 games. I don't mind him. Like FanDuel, I think he's a little bit overpriced at 6,200. I'll go some other directions, but DraftKings 58, like it's a decent price for him.
Yeah, it really is, and he does have upside. Maybe not in this matchup, but I mean, anybody can put up a big game at pretty much any given time, and we've seen it out of him. So I do actually like him. He projects to be in a pretty decent spot, and then maybe Torian Prince, who is basically blowout proof. Like he's going to get the run regardless, and we saw because of Atlanta last game because Dennis Schroeder was just benched for whatever reason, and I think it was Isaiah Taylor got ejected, and they were without Delaney and without Bembry. We saw some Torian Prince point guard minutes, and he didn't look terrible while doing so. So maybe they experiment with that a little bit more, and that does make him a little interesting, given his price point. But I hate trying to target any of these Hawks because they're getting destroyed. They're giving a bunch of guys minutes, and it's just not a good situation.
No, we're going to get to some games here. Like you said, Prince, like I don't mind riding the hot hand. He's been pretty solid over the last 5 games or so. We've kind of seen Bazemore drop off a little bit and Prince kind of come alive. Yeah, he's about it. Like I'm not really dealing with the front court situation as far as like centers go. It's been Dedmon and, getting about 26, 27 minutes a game. That's kind of about it.
Yeah, and you're getting some Muscala minutes, and yeah, it's just a bad situation.
Let's jump to the Toronto side here. I think this is a game because of the blowout. Like I'm going to have a little bit of interest with the bench guys. It's kind of reverting back to where we were kind of around the All-Star break and where we just talked about the Fred VanVleets and those guys of the world here.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to get exposure in tournaments to the Kyle Lowrys and the DeMar DeRozans, feel free. Like any one of those guys could come out and put up a massive game that could lead to the Hawks getting blown out, and the Hawks could just actually play some real basketball and keep this game close, which would keep DeRozan and Lowry on the floor a little bit longer, and fading them in like multiple lineups would seems like a pretty scary proposition if that does happen. So if you want to sprinkle them in, I think you can. I think Jonas Valanciunas is definitely interesting, just given like he's not going to be limited by the blowout because he's already limited playing limited minutes anyways. He's down to 50. He's at 5,600 on DraftKings, and he is 64 on FanDuel. Like he's putting up really solid performances in limited minutes against the Hawks already this season. So I think you can go there if you're dying to get exposure to the Hawks starters. But as you said, like I have more interest in the bench. Like Fred Van Vliet made it into my tournament article. Like he's playing really, really well recently, putting up solid production in limited minutes. Maybe he gets a few extra minutes if this game blows out, but like he's already playing over 20 minutes in most of these games anyway. So like I don't necessarily need this game to, blow out for him to get run.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be pretty well balanced. Like these guys are going to get minutes regardless of the blowout, so I feel pretty safe. You mentioned Valanciunas, like I don't mind him. I don't mind Ibaka here as well. Like his price is pretty fair. I think Pascal Siakam is also interesting in this spot. Like he should get around 24, 25 minutes in this spot, and he's another cheap guy off the bench that I like.
Yeah, Siakam and Jakob Poeltl, both guys that you can consider. They're two big men that should just, have a field day down low against this terrible interior defense of the Hawks. So I definitely don't mind going there. I don't know why DeLon Wright hasn't been getting the minutes recently. 13, 10, 13. Maybe it's just because Fred Van Vliet's been playing better. I don't know if I would go. I don't know if I would look there, but pretty much all the other bench guys definitely in play. Even CJ Miles, who has a tendency to just go off from time to time, hasn't really happened against this Hawks team, but like he's a streaky spot up shooter against a team that really struggles to defend the 3-point line and not great against spot up shooters this season. So you could even sprinkle him in.
Yep. Philly Charlotte next one here. 214 total. Philly favored by a point and a half. This game, it doesn't really stand out on paper as far as like matchup wise go. On the Philly side, like I'm still okay getting some exposure to like Embiid and Simmons, who Embiid's kind of cooled off a little bit. Obviously, had the big game against Charlotte last time out though.
Yeah, I think a couple of these guys have been really, really struggling with turnovers. Obviously, we saw 7 turnovers out of Embiid. We saw a bunch out of Simmons. Like they're really struggling recently with turnovers, and that's kind of hurt their fantasy production. But we did see Embiid against this Charlotte team a couple games ago. He got Dwight Howard in foul trouble, and then when Howard was off the floor, like he just went bananas and 23 and 15. We know the usage rate is still going to be there for him, so he's priced down below 10K on DraftKings, and he is 10-3 on FanDuel. You can't go wrong with him. I think there's probably better options at center, like that we'll get to later on. But like especially in tournaments where people are going to gravitate in other directions, I think he's a great option.
Yeah, I think people are going to overlook this game and kind of skip it, and I don't mind attacking it. I don't mind Embiid. I don't mind Simmons here. Like you mentioned the turnovers, he's got 9, 11 over his last 3 games. But I mean, before that, playing pretty well, kind of run into a stretch of matchups that weren't terribly great. But I could see Simmons bouncing back. Like I'm not afraid of obviously Kemba Walker defense at all.
Yeah, and just a consistent option. Like just because he does so much on the floor, he racks up the peripherals and the rebounds and the steals as well. So to go along with the scoring, so he just makes a great all around cash game option, especially given his price, like that low 8Ks over on DraftKings and 8,800 on FanDuel. Like I feel pretty safe that he's gonna have like a 40-point floor, which is perfectly fine for cash. So I do like Simmons. The guy that made it into my tournament article from the Phillies side of this game is Robert Covington. Man, he's been like a roller coaster. Like every couple of games, it's like way up and then way down and then way up and then way down. But like this is an excellent matchup here against a Charlotte team that's really, really bad against small forwards on the season. They've really struggled against spot up shooters, which is something that he's spotting up almost 38% of his possessions this season. I actually really like him given his price tag, 4,900 on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Like he comes out and gets you 30, 32 fantasy points at that price tag. It's a good return on his salary.
Yeah, I don't mind it. Covington's a guy who just can't quit this year. Like obviously was terrific in the first part of the season, signed an extension, and then has just been god awful most nights ever since. But at that price, like I'm looking for some decent upside out of him. I don't mind it. JJ Redick in cash games is still fine at his price, especially on FanDuel. He's like 4,900. 20, 25 fantasy points. That's kind of what you expect out of him. I'm not really looking for anything more. Like he's not a GPP guy, so Redick and Cash is probably the only other guy I'll mention here.
Yeah, I definitely think you can go there, especially in cash games. Like you said, not really a bunch of upside, but he's a guy who's basically coming in and getting you like 24, 26 fantasy points almost every single night. And he is another, spot up shooter against a team that really struggles against spot up shooters. So I definitely don't mind there. And I mean, even Dario Saric, like he's playing really well. Like his production hasn't been outstanding recently. Like he had 25 points, shot 9 of 11 from the floor against Milwaukee, but still only had like 35 fantasy points. But he's just another guy that could get you there tonight. So I don't mind sprinkling some of him in tournaments either.
Charlotte side, you start with Kemba Walker here. Although let's talk Nicholas Batum because he's been playing really, really well. Shooting guard, ever since Redick came back, like this is a team that's been struggling against shooting guards and kind of as expected. Like I didn't want to target them when Redick was hurt, like, and then now he's back and everything's kind of changed. And you look at Batum, I mean, he's just playing exceptionally well. I mean, over 30 fantasy points, really since the break. The mints have been there. He does a little bit of everything. Still at a reasonable price. I know it's come up, but I mean, deservingly so.
Yeah, he's been outstanding recently outside of like the Toronto game and the Boston game. Like even the Boston game, he was really good. He just played a few less minutes and shot really poorly. But like over the last 5 games, he's averaging 9.4 assists. That's raised his season average up to like 5.3. The peripherals have always been there for him. He's always been a guy that's gotten, a decent amount of rebounds. But now that he's getting, even more assists, like I really do like him here. And I mentioned that the Sixers are turning the ball over a ton. They lead the league with like 17.3 per game. They turned it over like 25, 26 times last game against Milwaukee. If they're just going to keep on turning the ball over like that, that's just going to boost Batum's floor because he is a guy that can notch those steals because he does have that length. So he made it in my tournament article. I didn't actually expect him to be as popular as he is probably going to be tonight whenever I wrote that. But I've seen him talked about a lot already. So I don't really care. Like I'm just still going to use him just because I think given his price tag, he has 45, 46 fantasy point upside. So I'll take that all day long.
And like you said, like, you mentioned the games where he shot poorly, but like everything's just backing up. Like he's only shot above 30% once over his last 4 games. So, I mean, it kind of indicates what else he's doing on the court. And, we saw the big upside just, 2 games ago against Philly.
Yeah, I alluded to that in the tournament article as well. But yeah, he's just doing so much on the floor and he's doing a lot of ball handling as well. And without Michael Carter-Williams, you might see like them stagger his minutes so he gets more like second units, like point guard minutes, because I don't think they really trust Malik Monk enough to do that.
Yeah. Kemba Walker, playing absurd minutes, usages there. He's just been a quality guy. Like, 40 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games, including a matchup against Philly. Hasn't been a matchup they've really been seekingly trying to target point guards against Philly, but I like Kemba here just because he's going to score.
Yeah, I'm always going to love getting some Kemba exposure. I don't know if he's going to make it in my lineups tonight just because there's some different point guard directions that I would like to go. But I think tournaments and cash games, he's an outstanding option. Even though the matchup is really not that great, I think you can still go there with Kemba.
Do you have any interest in anyone else here? Like, it's kind of the guards for me. I'm not tremendously interested with some of the value guys. Like, I know Frank Kaminsky's been decent. He'd probably be the only one just because he is still cheap.
Yeah, if Marvin Williams sits, we'll see. We'll see Frank Kaminsky moving in the starting lineup. He would be a very chalky option given if that actually happens. I think I prefer him coming off the bench. So I don't know if I would target him if he starts, at least not in tournaments. In cash games, if he starts, you just plug him in and move on. But I think in tournaments, I like him more if he's coming off the bench. But outside of him, like Michael Kidd Gilchrist is playing like freaking like terrible, and he's barely had like 12 fantasy points in 4 straight games. I'm not going there. Jeremy Lamb, I'm never going to say no to. He feels like a guy that just comes in and pretty much outside of a couple games gets you, 22, 24 fantasy points. But outside of that, like, I don't want to try to get Dwight Howard tonight. I don't know. Foul trouble, Dwight Howard just doesn't seem like a good combination.
With the Houston OKC next year, 221. Start this Houston side. I'm kind of okay, like, still looking other directions. Like, I don't feel like this game has to be a priority, even though there's just obviously a lot of studs, but it's a lot of high-priced guys here. Like, I'm not actively just jamming them into lineups.
Yeah, like, I mean, obviously it's going to be a popular game. People are going to, talk about the James Harden revenge game, the Russ. Obviously, people think there's bad blood between those two, and there's, all kinds of narratives around this game. If you want to use James Harden, feel free. Like, there's really no reason to not. Like, it's not a bad matchup. OKC's been absolutely terrible with Roberson off the floor. I haven't pulled it since their last game against Portland, but it was like they were giving up like 108 points per 100 possessions without Roberson on the floor this season. They gave up 108 points to the Trailblazers, so I don't think that number changed too terribly much. So yeah, like, if you want to get James Harden, feel free. Like, it's a good matchup. I don't know, like, there's really nothing you could say. It's James Harden, so he's a good player and it's a good matchup. So if you want to use him, use him.
Yeah, I mean, put up over 60 fantasy points last time out. Both him and Westbrook did. I don't mind getting exposure to Harden tonight. He's not my favorite pay-up option. I still like a lot of mid-range guys and kind of go unbalanced in GPPs. You feel the same way. Like, you're always kind of advocating skipping out on some of these bigger names. Chris Paul's dropped in price quite a bit just because he's been decent, but the upside really hasn't been there of late. But the fact that he is cheap, like, I'll consider him here just because of a price point play. But, like, I'm still not really looking to get that much exposure. And, like, Capella's somewhat interesting, but it's still a tough spot here against Adams.
Yeah, I think if I'm getting a bunch of exposure to anyone from Houston, it's probably going to be Trevor Ariza, who's a guy that you expect to play a bunch of minutes given the matchup, given they're without Joe Johnson, they're without Ryan Anderson. So that's two of these backups that aren't going to be on the floor. And Ariza's been pretty solid recently. I mean, outside of the Utah game, which is a terrible matchup, obviously, he has over 20 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 of the last 5 games. He's playing a bunch of minutes. Field goal attempts have been decent for him. So I think he's a good way to get cheap exposure to the Houston side of this game. Eric Gordon has been playing really well the last couple games. He's been really streaky this season. So, like, if he's on a hot streak right now, so I would probably hop on in tournaments. I don't think you can roll him out in cash games though, because he's really, really volatile option. And you mentioned Clint Capella. It is not a very good matchup for Clint Capella, but I will say, I mean, it doesn't really matter for Capella. Like, he's producing even in bad matchups. So he's 6,800 on DraftKings. I think that's probably a little too cheap for him. I mean, he put up 38 against the Thunder last time out, and we have seen big men put up big games against Steven Adams before. So I don't know that I would shy away from him in tournaments, but again, in cash games, you're not looking at Capella tonight.
I don't think so. And despite Oklahoma City being a good rebounding team, this is actually not a bad rebounding spot for Capella to rack in a double-double.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they are a good rebounding team. I'm scrolling up. They've been a little worse than their season average. They're giving up almost 44 rebounds over the last 10 games, so it's a little bit worse than their 41.4 over their season.
Yeah, so I mean, Capella's worthy of a look. As you mentioned, I like the Eric Gordon, Trevor Ariza calls as far as cheap exposure. Like, I think if you want to get at least one piece to the side, like, I think those guys are decent options.
Yeah, they're just, I mean, they're cheap guys. They're playing a decent amount of minutes. Like I said, Ariza's minutes you expect to be up there just given the matchup and how they're going to need a defender out there unlike Paul George and Carmelo Anthony. And that leads me also to thinking that PJ Tucker might be an interesting value option to get exposure to as well.
OKC side of things, like, Westbrook is just basically, I think, echoing thoughts on Harden. Like, if you want to get exposure, you can go ahead. I kind of like the secondary plays here. I like Paul George. I know he's been kind of, solid right around that 40 fantasy point range of late. Didn't play great against this Houston team last time out, but I think there's a spot where we could see the George upside.
Yeah, this is a great spot for him. Obviously, touching on Westbrook real quick, if you want to play him, feel free. This is actually a spot where when OKC is, and I think it was Adam Levitan that tweeted it out this morning, like when OKC has been a home underdog, Russell Westbrook has like outperformed his projections in most of those games. So he's been really solid whenever OKC is a home underdog. So I don't know how much value there actually is in that information, but again, if you want to use it as just another data point to roll Russell Westbrook out there, feel free. But I do really, really like Paul George. It's going to be a fast-paced game. You do expect there to be a few turnovers, and like Houston's defense is really good, but they have been susceptible at times to turning the ball over or to giving up big games to some of these wings. So I think he's a guy that you can roll out there, and in all formats, he has plenty of upside. And just because he gets the steals and the rest of the assists and the rebounds, like he has plenty of like he has a safe floor. Like I'm gonna throw that Portland game out the window and say that like I do expect him to notch probably 42, have like a 42 fantasy point floor here.
Yep. Steven Adams, I like as well here. Like 6,400 on DK is a nice price for Steven Adams. Double last time these two teams met. We've seen Houston struggle against opposing centers of late. Fourth most fantasy points allowed in the last 10 games, 27th defensive efficiency. I'll sign me up for some Steven Adams here, especially on DK where you can roster two centers. Like, he's kind of a little bit back in that price range where I like playing him earlier this season.
Yeah, now that he's not over like 7K, I'm definitely a little bit more comfortable rolling him out there. And it is a great matchup. He did really well against this team last time out. Houston does really struggle against the roll man, which makes Adams a very, very interesting option. 25% play frequencies, about 80th percentile as a roll man. Obviously, Houston has not at times been a good rebounding team. They give up a bunch of points in the paint as well. So I definitely would not be afraid to roll Adams out in all formats. He definitely has plenty of upside. I'm not going to go with Carmelo Anthony. I'm just going to pass on that one. But like Billy Donovan's talking about giving Corey Brewer more minutes. So it's a revenge game for Corey Brewer. Do with that information what you wish. Yeah.
One thing to note about Melo is I think we could potentially see kind of, him be a little bit more limited down the stretch. Would not surprise me. Like Jeremy Grant's played really well. I could see him. He honestly should start to eat into Melo's minutes. I don't know if it'll 100% happen, but he should.
Yeah, he should, at least until the playoffs, and you start, probably needing someone that can actually score a little bit more than Jeremy Grant. But yeah, I mean, I think Melo resting a little bit more often, at least playing fewer minutes, might actually be a thing. We'll see how that works out with Melo's, ego and whatnot. But because Jeremy Grant's been playing really well and his length is really useful on defense, he's another value option that you can consider from this game.
Yep. Moving on here, Denver and Dallas, 219 total. This Denver side completely healthy again. Looking at Denver here, I want to say I wish they were a little bit more consistent. This is a decent spot, but I have just a weird feeling about Denver tonight. I don't know what it is.
I don't know. Like I do like a lot of the Denver options. I think it's going to be an interesting game to target, but like most of these guys are probably a little like underpriced given the upside that they have. Unfortunately, now that Paul Millsap is back, that kind of has taken the shine off Jokic. Like he's back to, really struggling to play with another big man alongside of him. So I don't know if I'm going to be overly excited about rostering him, but it is a great matchup for Jokic, and it's a matchup where he's absolutely dominated this season. So it's kind of scary to think about fading Jokic in this spot. Like I feel like he's on the verge of a breakout game. So, I mean, if you want to get some exposure, I think you can definitely get tournament exposure. But again, as I said, there's better cash game options at center tonight.
Yeah, like since Millsap's been back, his usage rate's under 20%. Before that, he was absolutely solid. Like he had the two monster games against Dallas this year. I mean, he's averaged a near triple double in 2 games. I like him in GPPs. I wish the price had come down a little bit. Like he's still 9,700 on FanDuel. He's 9,500 on DraftKings. It's still a little pricey for me to take a chance on, but if you're building multiple lineups, I don't hate it. Paul Millsap, I think, is the big that I have the most interest in, just because he's still, I think, far too cheap. 6,100 on FanDuel, especially with the blocks and steal upside that he brings. He's under 6K on DraftKings. Minutes should be right around kind of that 27 mark. Doing a little bit of everything here against a bad Dallas rebounding team. I think I go back to the well here with Millsap.
Yeah, he's definitely a great option to consider. He's one of the cheapest. I think he is actually the cheapest way to get exposure to like the starting lineup for the Denver Nuggets. I wish he was going to be playing a few more minutes, and we've seen like they've come out and said that they want to keep him right around the 24-minute mark, and then that same game after they said that, they roll him out there for 27. So I don't know. Hopefully he starts to play a few extra minutes. Maybe that happens tonight. I don't necessarily see it, but given, just the role he has on this team, it's a great way to get exposure to this terrible Dallas team, or to this terrible Dallas defense. And outside of him, like I think Will Barton and Gary Harris are the two guys that I have the most interest in. Barton's just been outstanding recently, continues to play really well, continues to be a really high usage player, gets some of the backup point guard minutes, just a bunch of field goal attempts. Like he just comes in and starts chucking. He's still playing a bunch of minutes. You can't go wrong with Barton, and it's a good matchup for him as well. It's a matchup he's been fairly solid in the last 3 meetings, so I think he's interesting. And Gary Harris, I have a giant man crush on Gary Harris. Like he's just a guy that goes into my lineups almost every single night because he has a bunch of upside, plays really well. He's a good defender, plays a bunch of minutes, and he's scoring out of his mind recently. So that's kind of where my thoughts lie on this Denver team.
I'm with you. I don't see myself fading Harris, especially on DraftKings. Like 6,300 for Harris tonight in this spot, it's too good to pass up on for me. FanDuel obviously is a little bit more expensive, but very much playable. 7,200, Barton 7,900. Like both those options. Those are the two guards that I'd look at. I don't have a ton of interest in Murray. I know the shot attempts are still there, but there's other other point guard options I rather take.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Dallas side of things here. Wesley Matthews is questionable for tonight's game. You'd think we get some more minutes for guys like Yogi Ferrell, guys like JJ Barea, but we saw some of the even further bench guys kind of get some more run. Does that concern you here?
A little bit. I mean, we saw Doug McDermott play 34 minutes because whenever Wes Matthews was out last game, so Carlisle kind of just, I don't know. It seems like those guys are going to be a little bit unpredictable. So, like, if Wes Matthews is out, I think you can definitely look at Dennis Smith Jr. because it is a great matchup against a team that at times has struggled to defend the rim. Obviously, with Millsap back in there, you expect them to not struggle as much. But I still think you can sprinkle in some Dennis Smith. I really want to get exposure to JJ Barea just because, he is just a really high energy, high fantasy point per minute player, but I prefer him when he's in the starting lineup. So if Wes Matthews plays and they roll out the Barea, Dennis Smith, Matthews starting lineup, I would have a little bit of exposure to Barea there, but I don't really have a ton of interest in this Dallas team, even though like Denver's defense has been terrible. In 3 games this season, the Mavs just haven't been that great against this team. So like there's not a whole lot to really, really like.
Yeah, you mentioned Barea. I have some interest. I don't like that he's 6K on DraftKings, but I don't hate the play. Like I think you can also use both him and Harris tonight as a viable strategy. But yeah, I'm with you. Like Dallas has just been a team that's been very, very average as far as fantasy production goes. I think Dennis Smith is the only one that I really have any interest in. This isn't a spot that I'm really looking for Dirk, even though he's been playing well lately.
I mean, I guess Harrison Barnes is interesting. He's always a cash guy just because he plays a bunch of minutes and he does so much. But like his price is starting to really come down. He's 61 and 6,200 over on FanDuel. So he's a guy like I feel like he's going to come out and get you 30 plus fantasy points. So he feels like a pretty solid cash game option. But the rest of them, like I'm not overly excited about any of them. Maybe a sprinkle of Nerlens Noel and tournaments and hope he gets like 20 plus minutes tonight. Like his minutes are trending upwards, so that's promising. But like, it's also Nerlens Noel, so yeah.
I want Nerlens Noel to be a thing so badly.
So do I.
It's been a while. Yeah, let's move on here. Knicks and Portland. Portland favored by 9, 215 total. This Knicks team has just been something else of late. Still rolling plenty of point guards, but obviously it's kind of been Ntilikina, it's been Moody, it's been Trey Burke of late. Do you have any interest in any of those guys here?
No, but I do have a really funny stat. So since Moody was acquired, he's played 193 minutes. The Knicks have been outscored by 87 points in those 193 minutes of Moody is on the court.
Oh boy. Man.
Like if I'm getting any exposure to the Knicks point guards, it's going to be Trey Burke, just because his usage is freaking ridiculous. He comes in, he plays limited minutes, and just jacks up a ton of shots, and he has a ton of upside. He's probably the only Knicks point guard that I have any interest in.
Yeah, he's shooting really well. I mean, over 50% over the last 5 games. I don't mind him here. That's kind of about it. Enes Kanter is somewhat interesting here. Like I envision him kind of getting the similar kind of minutes that he got last time out, which isn't a ton, but he's a great fantasy point per minute guy. Worthy of a look for me here in this spot. Like at his price, like 6,500 on FanDuel is pretty fair for him if you want to take a shot. 7K on DraftKings, I'll pass.
Yeah, he's still playing. I mean, even in 22 minutes, he's still putting up massive outings. It's not a great matchup, but it's also not terrible. I think Portland's like 20th against the center over the last 10 games. So, and that's before last night. So, I think he's fine. I think he's usable on DraftKings and cash. Upside might be a little limited, but like I still think you can roll him out there. Kyle O'Quinn's a little bit interesting just because, they are playing him a few extra minutes, but it's really tough to trust Kyle O'Quinn. But he's another guy who's putting up really solid production even in limited minutes. So I think it's Trey Burke, it's Kyle O'Quinn, and it's Enes Kanter for me. I just can't trust these Knicks. Like I just can't.
Yeah, like, we were hoping Michael Beasley would kind of be a thing, but we saw his minutes kind of just really trend down. Like you see Courtney Lee and like Troy Williams and Lance Thomas is like all getting minutes. It's not a situation to go after.
No, it's really not.
Portland here. I got a question for you here before we start. Somewhere there's an alternate universe where Lillard is getting MVP love. I think he deserves to be in the MVP conversation, not win it, but I just think he deserves to be in it.
He does deserve to be at least in the conversation because he's just been absolutely insane this season for the Trailblazers. Like they would be a bottom dwelling team if it was not for Damian Lillard. Like you said, he doesn't deserve to win it, but he definitely deserves to be in the conversation for like MVP.
Yeah, he's just been unreal. Like that game last night was phenomenal. His fourth quarter play is tremendous. What do you think about him tonight? It's a little bit of a different slate here with other pay-up options. It's not a bad spot here against the Knicks. Do they need the big Lillard kind of 30-plus fantasy point or 30-plus real point game here? I don't know, and I think that's what concerns me a little bit, but it's hard to deny just how good he's been.
It really is. I think getting tournament exposure, like if you're playing in cash games, you're definitely getting exposure to one of the studs, which makes it really tough to get Lillard and some of the other like the high 9K guys. But if you're building a more balanced lineup in tournaments, like I definitely think Lillard is the go-to option. Like, I mean, this guy's got 55, 60 fantasy point upside, which like is basically what you're hoping for, a floor out of the studs. So yeah, like I think he's a great tournament option at point guard. Like we know the usage is there, we know the production's there. He's actually better on the second half of back-to-backs. He shoots better, and his fantasy production has been better on the second half of a back-to-back. And we know the matchup is outstanding, so I think Lillard is a great tournament option tonight.
Yeah, I like him here. As far as other Portland guys go, like I don't have a lot of interest in this game. I think McCollum's a little bit overpriced. I don't know how he would fit into my roster tonight, just being at, 7,300 on DraftKings. He's 78 on FanDuel. Lillard kind of starts with him and ends with him for me here.
McCollum would be another guy I would look at if you're if you're going with a balanced approach. We know like the Knicks have been 29th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against shooting guards. McCollum is another guy that actually shoots really, really good on the second half of back-to-backs. He's shooting almost 50% from three on the second night of a back-to-back. So I think he's a definite interesting like tournament option again if you're going with the balanced route.
Anyone else here you like the front court of like Aminu or Nurkic here?
No, like I'm not chasing the Nurkic game here. Like, I mean, again, if you want to sprinkle him in tournaments, go for it. But like, I'm not chasing that game. Like, they tried to make Zach Collins a thing last night, and he got like 4 fouls in 9 minutes. Just didn't work out. So I'm gonna pass.
Yeah. Brooklyn and Golden State, 230 total. Golden State favored by 14.5. Let's start with this Brooklyn side. I mean, I guess like if you're expecting this game to stay close, like you can get some Brooklyn exposure. But I'm not too thrilled with this one.
I will say, so the Nets, let's see, over their 6 of the last 7 games at Golden State, 4 have been decided by 9 or fewer points. So that's promising. Like they're actually playing pretty well against at Golden State. They're keeping games close, which would lead you to believe that the Nets should be, a good team to target here. The problem is, like we saw last game when Karis LeVert was going bananas, that led to D'Angelo Russell not being able to see the floor. So, like, D'Angelo Russell's going bananas. That means Karis LeVert is probably not going to see the floor. If Spencer Dinwiddie's going bananas, that means maybe one of these other guys isn't going to see the floor. So it's really tough to pinpoint which one of these guys you want to get exposure to. I will say Spencer Dinwiddie's price is probably a little bit too cheap tonight.
I don't mind sprinkling in some of these guys. I like the Russells and Dinwiddie's. Like they're all very playable. I think this is also an interesting Allen Crabbe spot. I know we saw obviously kind of LeVert play well, and Hollis Jefferson's back. He played well in that last game against the Clippers, but I think these guys are all interesting at their price tags and excellent GPP options because they carry that upside, and especially if you want to pair them with, a Golden State player, that's kind of the only way I go it. I really wouldn't probably use them on their own.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. Like outside of maybe DeMarre Carroll or, you mentioned Rondae Hollis Jefferson, I think those would be maybe the 2 guys I would consider using outside of like a game stack or something like that. Because Rondae, I mean, playing 32 minutes against the Clippers, that's really promising that we should see him back over 30 minutes. And this is actually a great matchup for Rondae. He put up a solid game against the Warriors last time out. The Warriors do really struggle at times against power forwards. They struggle against the roll man, which is something Rondae Hollis Jefferson has kind of implemented into his game and has been really good at. So I do actually think Rondae Hollis Jefferson is probably my favorite way to get exposure to this game.
Yeah, well, I like that call. Jared Allen's been playing really well. I kind of see him getting played off a little bit here, even with Golden State being kind of actually not that great against centers of late.
Yeah, just because they don't roll a traditional center, so when they go small, you might get some like Rondae minutes at the 5, which would be like DeMar Carroll at the 4. So I don't necessarily think Jared Allen's a great option tonight.
No. Golden State, we've seen all these guys kind of top out about 40 fantasy points in terms of upside of late. Kind of same thing. Like if you're expecting this game to stay close, like I think a lot of people are just going to be writing off this game, blowout potential, and that's all you're going to hear. But I like getting exposure to guys like Durant and Curry and Green here. I think Klay Thompson is also an interesting option, given that he's been kind of a little lackluster of late. This is a spot where I think he can pop off.
Yeah, I think Curry is going to be my favorite option here. It's just a great spot for him. I know the last time these teams faced off, I think it was Durant that was out, and Curry went absolutely bananas. Obviously, that ankle injury is a little concerning. He says he's fine. He says he's going to play, and it's not going to be a problem. But I would still just keep an eye on that. But I think Curry is definitely my favorite option. Obviously, we know the Nets struggle against spot-up shooters. Curry, an excellent spot-up shooter, but so is Durant. So Durant's another guy that you can consider. And just his all-around game just generally leads to him being a safe play, even in games that don't stay close. Like he's able to, put up, 40 plus fantasy points in limited minutes just because he gets the assists and the rebounds and the steals and the blocks and stuff. So those 2 guys would be where I start with. And then you can go with Draymond Green. And then I think Klay Thompson is fourth for me.
Yep. And of course, if there is anything weird that happens with the Golden State side, like it just makes the other star, whatever star is not sitting, like it makes them more intriguing.
Yeah, exactly.
So, no interest for any bench guys here at all.
No, no.
New Orleans and LA last game of the night, 236 over under. Another potential late night hammer game. I'll start with this New Orleans side. Anthony Davis, like, I think he's obviously the cash game guy to just build around even at a high price.
Yeah. Since we brought up the MVP race, can we just stop with Anthony Davis for MVP? Like, it ain't going to fucking happen. I'm sorry.
No, it's Harden. Harden's locked it up.
Anthony Davis, yes, he's been really good, but he is not the MVP. Get out of here. Just get out of here, people.
No, he's been doing this for what, 10 games? Harden's been doing this the entire season.
Last 2 seasons, I'm a diehard Thunder fan, and I think Harden got robbed last year.
Yeah, I will agree with that. It's Davis here. Like, obviously, you can play him like GPPs at that price. It's obviously he needs the monster game to pay that off. 11-6 on DraftKings, like that's still not bad. It's the 12-5 on FanDuel. That's tough to pay in GPPs.
Yeah, it's really like it gives me like gastric distress. It gives me a case of the Rodney Hoods when I think about potentially fading Anthony Davis and a dude that has like 90, 100 fantasy point upside over like 2 of the last 4 games, 5 games. I will say it's not a home game for Davis, so he's not going to get those extra padded defensive stats by the home scorekeeper, so keep that in mind. But it's still a great matchup. Clippers 16th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against the center position. They've struggled this season against centers. They do still give up a decent amount of rebounds, even though they have one of the best rebounding big men in the NBA down low. If you want to roll him out, feel free. Like I think he's probably the option I would go with over Harden and Westbrook in cash games. FanDuel, you might be able to get 2 of those guys in. It might be a little tough, but I think Davis is an excellent option. But I want to get exposure to Jrue Holiday, whose price is way up there, but like he's been outstanding recently, and even Rajon Rondo, like
TV game.
I hate trying to pinpoint the Rajon Rondo games, but he's played over 30 minutes in 4 straight games. He's been really good recently outside of the Phoenix game. And as you mentioned, it is a national TV game. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like Rondo here. Depending on your comfort level, I do think he's cash game viable. It's depending on your comfort level, but this is just a good spot. He has been playing well. Minutes are there. The TV game narrative is something that is real for Rondo.
Yeah, it really is. Like I don't want to go back and try to pinpoint, like pull up his statistics on these TV games and non-TV games, but like it is one of those actual like real narratives for him.
Yeah. Mirotic, been kind of on and off. Like GPPs, I don't mind him here.
Yeah, I still like him more if he's coming off the bench. So if Emeka Okafor is out, then Mirotic probably slides into the starting lineup, and that kind of hurts him a little bit because he's not going to get as much usage. But I still prefer him off the bench.
Other guys like Etwan Moore, Darius Miller, like just not fantasy viable right now.
No, not really. Like Moore is really, really cheap, and it is a great matchup. But yeah, I don't know that I'd go there.
Clipper side of things here, their backcourt options have obviously dwindled over the last few days. I guess we'll start with maybe Lou Williams here. Guy's been pretty solid. Like we know the usage of minutes are going to be there. With Gallinari out, like there's a little bit more usage. Like I'm more intrigued with like Lou Williams and Tobias Harris in these spots.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Lou Williams is fine. It's an excellent matchup. I'm still really concerned, and I wrote about this in the cheat sheets over the weekend. I'm still really concerned about his fatigue level because you can just see like his shooting numbers basically from December to now have just been like a big giant like downward trend. And so that is a little concerning for a guy like Lou Williams who does rely on raw scoring most nights, but like he's still getting there. Like, I mean, he's still over 36 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. if you want to roll him out, feel free. But like, it's not like it is early in the season where you feel like you have to get exposure to him because he's putting up like just insane numbers that you're afraid to fade.
Yeah, like Lou Williams for me, like it's part of the game stack here. Like that's how I'm looking to use him. If I have the cash to spend up, I don't mind giving it to him. Just because like I'm not super thrilled with kind of the other high price shooting guard options. Like, I'm not going to make it all the way up to Harden. Like I'm okay with using Lou. I'm not a big fan of DeRozan or really McCollum tonight. Like I like Holiday and Lou kind of if I'm paying up.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. But like, I mean, I guess if you're looking on FanDuel, I mean, if you're not going to make it all the way up to Harden, obviously Beal's still fine. But I don't know, maybe Barton might be a little bit better option than Lou Williams because I do think the ownership is going to gravitate towards Lou. But you obviously, I mean, you can still make a great case for him. But like, I don't know. I kind of want to get more exposure to you mentioned Tobias Harris. He made it in my tournament article. He's a guy who's freaking 1.2 fantasy points per minute without Bradley and Tyrone Wallace and Gallinari on the floor. He's just been playing freaking out of his mind recently. Pelicans 28th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against power forwards. So I absolutely love him. It's a great spot for Austin Rivers. And even like Milos Teodosic, like he's not going to play more than 29 minutes, but like he comes out. I mean, what is he? 4,700 on DraftKings and 4,400 on FanDuel. Like 27, 28 fantasy points in those 27 minutes. You'll take that all day. So I think that's where I start with my exposure, and then I love DeAndre Jordan too, but I don't know that I really have to go into why DeAndre Jordan is a great play tonight.
Yeah, I like Jordan quite a bit. Like FanDuel, like he's under 8K at 7,900. DraftKings he's right at that 8K mark. Yeah, against the Pelicans front court, like there's a potential for a huge amount of rebounds here. Like he's been playing really, really well, and we've also seen the scoring production be very solid.
Yeah, and I'll just throw this out there, and it's 116 and a half minutes without Gallinari, without Bradley, and without Tyrone Wallace on the floor since the All-Star break. 1.36 fantasy points per minute.
Yeah, sign me up there. Yeah, like this is obviously a game that you want to target. There's some decent mid-range plays from this game, so if you don't want to quite pay up, like you can look at the Tobias Harrises and Drew Holidays and those guys.
Yeah. And don't look at Wes Johnson's ankles tonight.
Oh man, that was brutal. Like by far one of the we haven't talked about that since that happened. That was by far one of the worst that I've ever seen.
Yeah, that was so disrespectful.
Like my ankles hurt just watching. Like I got off the couch to like probably just go get some more chips or something, and I just like crumbled to the ground.
I saw since it was announced today that Bumble is the official sponsor of the Clippers. I think it was Ricky that tweeted it out. It was like it was like a typical Bumble conversation. It was like, "Hey, you up?" And Wes Johnson's ankles responded with, "Nope."
Oh man, there are going to be some good jokes to move forward with this.
Yeah, there will.
Let's go highest score tonight. No limit. No Anthony Davis. Actually, that's the only cap limit I'm putting on this.
Well, if you're going to take Anthony Davis, so you got to take Harden and Westbrook off.
Do they have 90? Like, I don't know if they're putting up 90 tonight, but like Davis could legitimately put up 90. But all right, let's go no double digits.
No double digits. Let's go with Damian Lillard.
I like it. It's tough.
My Damian Lillard love just knows no bounds. Like it's always just going to be Damian Lillard for me.
Oh, man, that's tough right here. I want to say Paul George. Big game out of Paul George tonight.
I like it.
So that's it for us. You can go to DaveFantasyCafe.com. Check out Brent's article for GPPs on tonight's slate. And good luck. And see you guys tomorrow.
Good luck.